Welcome, welcome, welcome back, friends of On the Way Home, and maybe not friends yet, but friends by the end of this podcast for sure. Thanks for joining us on today's show. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, and I am from Blue Door's organization. And I don't know why I had to pause to think about that. I'm from Blue Door, have been for a long time. Blue Door's an organization in York region that's been around for 42 years. We do all sorts of work helping the most vulnerable people, from seniors to families to youth to newcomers to us LGBTQ plus youth in need of housing and supports. We do tons of work. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. I work with over 100 brilliant people, and they put up with me day in, day out. And I think we do a little bit of good work. So check us out at bluedoor.ca. Let's talk about today's guest. Listen, so today's guest came around. If you know John Fox, he is a regular on this show because he's a brilliant and passionate guy when it comes to affordable housing. And so we talk with John a lot. John reached out and said, listen, I have a guest for you. He's awesome. He's innovative. He's pushing the limits. Those are the guests we like to have on the show because it is about, hey, not these are the problems, but more importantly, these are the solutions. And so we've got on the show, we have Tim Coldwell. And he's from Enska. Now, recently, he started his own business. He co-founded it with Wes Hall. And so we talk with Tim about his journey. He's got a fascinating story. I mean, he took a company that was doing well and just skyrocketed, took it national, grew the revenue. That was crazy. Made sure they were always doing social good. And throughout his whole journey and all the wonderful things he's done, being a force for good, as Tim put it, was always kind of at the forefront, and it's driven him. And once he got his organization he started with up to a certain point, we talk about how him and his wife had a conversation about, he got it there. What was next? How could he continue to be so passionate about being a force for good? And that meant stepping back, leaving, and starting something fresh and new. He had a conversation with one of his mentors after he is a very humble guy. He talked about he won an award for being, I think he was the Entrepreneur of the Year or Innovator of the Year, something like that. And he wins this Canadian award, meets Wes Hall, who has a amazing and cool story of his own, growing up in poverty and working his way through to the success that he has now. And Wes and him chatting and coming up with this idea, and we talk about Enska, what it's doing. One of the pieces flowing out of that is 50 by 50, that they're looking to put thousands and thousands of people into apprenticeships where you break the cycle of poverty, you build the housing Canada needs, and you give people a good life, right? It really contributes all around. I know that quite personally because we do that at Blue Door through our Construct program, but Tim's talking about, hey, when they're managing big projects, they're going to make it mandatory. If you want to work on that with them, you're going to have to contribute and help people get into apprenticeships during, if you're working on that project. That and much more. This is an innovator. This is a change maker. This is someone you need to listen to. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Let's go to it. So excited to have you here, Tim. Thanks so much for making the time and joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, listen, full truth to this story of how you arrived on the podcast. One of our 5-timer club members, probably one of the only ones, John Fox, said, listen, you got to speak to Tim. He's doing awesome stuff, innovative stuff, and I think people should hear about it. And if John says that, listen, it doesn't take much to twist my arm. You are a fellow podcaster too, or have done some podcasting, as you can witness with that professional microphone in front of you. So pumped to have you on, and you're doing really cool stuff. We want to hear your story. Before we get to that, we have a question we ask everyone because it's different for everyone. It's personal, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Home for me. Like I'm always running around in the world with my hair on fire, going 1,000 miles an hour. So for me, it's kind of like the place where I can slow down, just do nothing, relax, put the brain in neutral, and spend great time with the family.
Wonderful. And I love that the theme of where I can relax, or I can be me, and family. And that's the connection. And we've got a streak going on, over 200 answers like that. No one's ever said anything about the actual physical structure of home and what it means to them. So I'm glad to see that streak continuing. You have a fascinating and inspiring story. That's my opinion, anyways. I've been doing some research, and I'm like, wow, no wonder John said you got to have this guy. I was hoping, as much as you're comfortable, you can walk us through your journey, both kind of professional and personal, as much as you're comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure. So like, I think the best place to start, let's just say it this way. There's two things that changed my life. I am a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, and the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte gave me a scholarship when I was 17-ish. And I grew up in what I would describe as precarious circumstances. There wasn't a safety net there for me. And so they gave me an opportunity by supporting my education at the University of Alberta. So I did structural and geotechnical engineering at the U of A. And I had to work hard to get that educational support. So I'm proud of that. And then the second thing that changed my life is a contractor in Edmonton named Shandos Construction gave me a job, and I needed support and I needed an opportunity, and they took a chance on me when I needed it the most. And so the organization very much became a second family for me. And I never really sat out to climb the ladder. I just focused on doing good work because I was so thankful for the opportunity that I was given. And lo and behold, I was the youngest shareholder in the history of the company at 20 some years old. And I was appointed president at 35. And we took the company from, at that time, call it 250 million or something like that of annual revenue, up to nearly 800 million of revenue. We went national, expanded across the country, did all sorts of things that I'm super proud of. And I would say the thing that I'm most proud of is framing the organization as a purpose-driven organization, and then also leaning into, let's just call it, using business as a force for good. We became the largest B Corp certified contractor in the world, and I'm just super proud of that adventure. And so, anyways, that's kind of a story up until last year, and then last year, at call it 800 million of revenue and 700 and some employees, I just found that I was doing big company admin 90% of the time, and the connection to the customers and the clients wasn't there. My wife actually said to me, we ran an event in Toronto, and at the end of it, she said, "Man, you're tired. You're not the same guy." She hadn't seen me speak for quite a while since COVID was going on. And long story short, we had a series of conversations, and at the end of that, decided to think about selling my equity in the business and just doing something completely different with the rest of my career. And I got to say that I couldn't have asked for any better support from the organization through that whole journey. That's been great. And launched a new business here beginning of this year. So really excited about what the future has in store.
It's incredible, and you make. Yeah, I think you're being very humble in that journey. You did so many big things. What were some of the? But you could not have been a force for good, or you could not have been a B Corp. Or what's the driving force? What do you think in you pushes you to do something like that?
Early in my career, I think it was, and it's probably with many people. It's about climbing the ladder, or it's about, in my instance, it was white knuckling it so I could, keep it on the rails. And so there's kind of this panic, for lack of a better term, that was here early in my career. But once you get to a certain amount of comfort and success, you start to really question, like, why am I here and why am I doing this? And so I've always been very comfortable with the idea of personal purpose, and I've always had a very clear picture of that. For me, a bigger boat, a bigger house, a faster car, all those things are nice, but they don't give you joy and fulfillment. And so I've been in search of happiness, joy, and fulfillment my whole life. And fundamentally, I don't think you can achieve that unless it's rooted in service to others. It has to be outside of you. And so if you have that as a kind of a foundational belief, it's a very easy step to get into corporate purpose. How can businesses solve some of the greatest challenges in society while making a profit? And that was kind of the impetus for my thinking about that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, right? Because I think we find ourselves in the midst of a housing crisis, and we absolutely need the private sector to step up and do that public good. They play a huge part. In fact, most housing is built by the private sector. So I think if they're not on board, we're in trouble. They're doing that. So let's get to your newest journey and looking back. It's you had some thoughts, and then you talked to somebody new, a gentleman named Wes Hall.
Yeah.
And kind of work through that. Can you walk us through that bit of a journey into what you're doing now?
Yeah. When I thought of like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I'm 41 years old now. And, I'm like, okay, well, between now and 65 or something like that, there's 25 odd some years. So like, what do I want to do? And how can I have the greatest impact, was the conversation. And so I thought about a few things. I thought about starting my own construction company, doing prefab housing in remote Indigenous communities. Also was approached by several large general contractors in Canada and the United States to, be their Canadian president and CEO. So that was interesting, but fundamentally it would have been the same thing I had been doing already. And, same thing, bigger toys and American overlords, frankly. And I started to think about, well, what do I really want? Well, freedom is another part of it. The idea of being able to get up on any given day and say, I want to go in this direction as opposed to that direction. When you're leading in a large employee-owned business, you have to socialize like so many things. And so, I did a lot of work on that. But the idea of having that flexibility, once again, to turn on a dime was really attractive. And then I met Wes Hull through the Entrepreneur of the Year Awards. I was one of the winners for Canada a couple of years ago. And when he heard that I'd made a shift, he called me up and he said, hey, Tim, let's connect. Don't really invest in business concepts. I invest in people. Let's have a chat. And so he and I sat down a couple of times, and I started to land on this idea of launching a real estate advisory business. I think that market is underserved, in particular with First Nations as well as not-for-profit housing operators. And I think there's a great opportunity to kind of modernize and elevate the level of services that are provided in that space. So that was the idea. And I just look forward to a ton of great things working with him. He is a guy that gets impact and purpose, and his whole story of growing up in a tin shack in Jamaica and making it big in Canada and starting out in the mailroom is super inspiring. So I couldn't ask for a better partner there. And so just kind of connecting it back to part of why we zeroed in on real estate advisory is that my observation as a contractor, you're often like the last in the link, and your ability to influence the project is fairly low. I think we did some great things on that. But the idea of being a real estate advisor, you're at the early stages of the project. You can educate the client on what is possible. And then we're the ones that are hiring the contractors and the architects. And in some instances, I'm going to end up being a developer as well. And so we call the shots. And so we can very much get the supply chain to use business as a force for good principles and leverage the buying power that exists on these large real estate projects.
Very good. And I think you kept the force for good theme in your new business. And what kind of makes it unique? Are there others that do similar, or is this kind of unique, or a gap you saw that you thought someone needs to step in and fill this and do it a little differently?
Yeah, I think there's the language that we used when launching the business was very purposeful. We are calling it a real estate advisory and project governance practice. There's a big difference between governance and management. And frankly, I think there's way too much management that's happening on projects
Yes.
and not enough governance. And what's the failure rate of large institutional projects is something like 98% or something like that, not completed on time or on budget. And so obviously the management is not working. And so I think the idea of really elevating it and getting out of the weeds of pushing paper, and really thinking about what does success look like? How are we going to get there? And frankly, the tough leadership conversations that need to occur in these multidisciplinary teams in order to keep them headed in the right direction. So I would say that we are the only group that's really focused on that level of leadership in the real estate advisory space.
Very cool. And the name of the company is?
So the kind of Western pronunciation is Enska. But the correct Mohawk pronunciation is Énska. And it's the Mohawk word for one. And I thought that was cool. Like, one as in we are all one. One as we're going to be first on race day. One as we are thinking together, aligned as one. And then the kind of the idea of the power of one. One person can make a change, but you can't do it alone. So there's lots of riffs that come out of that I think are kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And that's why I asked you to say it, because I was pretty sure it wasn't just as spelt. And I'm sure people do that all the time. Let me ask you talked about measuring success. How will you know if you've been successful? Looking down the road, maybe 3 years from now, you're looking back. What are the marks of success for you?
Yeah. A good way to think about this that I've always kind of lived throughout my career is like what are they going to put on the tombstone, so to speak? And so for me, I would love that inscription to be loving husband, father, grandparent, probably grandfather, and business leader that proved you could be wildly successful by having an impact and by doing the right things. So I think there's too many people that have an either or, profit or purpose. And I think my life's mission is to prove you can have your cake and eat it too. You can do both. It's not or, it's and. And so anyways, that's the foundation. And then you got to figure out the business model that can help you support that. And so there's this ratio in the construction and real estate business. For every $10 million of construction value that's put in place in the field, you generally create the need for 3 new apprenticeships. And so then there's the standard fee ratio. So if you take that ratio of 3 per 10 million for apprenticeships, and you take fees at 2% of construction value or something like that, and then you model out growth of my new business, and you say, okay, we're going to start at nothing, and hopefully we're going to grow at 10% a year, and you take that and you stretch it out over 25 years, you get into this massive number of total projects managed or influenced, and then it turns into something around the order of 50,000 youth. And so this idea of could we grow this business and use the influence that we have through this in business to change the lives of 50,000 youth in Canada, that's the kind of stuff that gets me out of bed every day. In terms of like how I would measure success at the end of the day, this idea of impacting 50,000 youth by 2050 is a great idea. There's 7 million youth in Canada, and something like 700,000 live below the poverty line. And of those 700,000, about 40% are Indigenous and 30% are Black. And so if you think of how you can have an impact, this idea of giving those sorts of folks opportunities on construction projects, on real estate projects, lifting them from poverty, transforming their life, and costing the project 0 premium capital cost, that's the kind of stuff that gets me out of bed every day. So super excited about it.
Yeah, that's your campaign. It's 50. Is it 50-4-50 or 50 and 50, right?
50 by 50.
50 by 50.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. I mean, I think this is what most people understand. I saw an article in the Toronto Star on the weekend, and they were talking about how a lot of the problem about the trades and people not going into it is a mom and dad problem of what? You're going into the trades? No, no, no. I need you to get an English degree you're not going to use, or whatever that might be, right? It was the frowned upon, oh no, kind of thing. Where, and I put that out and said, Mom and Dad, think hard about this. I mean, a career in the trades, number one, very fulfilling. How many of us can point at something to say, I built that, I was part of that, I did that. It's meaningful work I can take anywhere in the country, and it's well-paying work. I mean, it starts off as an apprentice, you can make a living wage, and not many jobs are like that. I started off in recreation. Let me tell you, it was not a living wage. But so we need to change that mentality. And for us, even Tim at Blue Door, where I work, we run a pre-apprenticeship program. We see it. For so many years, Tim, I say I was part of the problem because I was doing these employment programs that were well-meaning, giving people a good experience, but it did not break the cycle of poverty. It actually frustrated people. Like, hey, thank you for the crappy job I hate, that bad hours, and doesn't pay me much more than I can make as social assistance. Thanks for your help, buddy. And then this one where it's apprenticeship. I mean, like right away, you're making good money. You're part of something. You're part of a team, and we see it. You have health benefits, and so it's crazy. Why do you think? Why do we get into the situation where we need so many apprenticeships? What happened?
Well, a few things. I think we in North American society kind of lost our ways. If you want me to get kind of philosophical about it, there's the arts and craft movement, early in the 1940s and 50s kind of thing. And then we went to the moon, and that whole space race ended up, the North Americans almost lost to the Russians. And so very quickly, the whole education system shifted to this kind of like mass production mode and streaming smart versus not smart people accordingly, so that you can produce a whole bunch of engineers and scientists and people with university degrees. And what came out of that is this idea that you're something less than if you don't have a university degree. And I think we as a society need to get back to that kind of ethos where people who work with their hands are respected the same way you respect a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. One of Bill Gates' favorite authors is Vaclav Smil. He's from the University of Manitoba. And he talks about how thriving economies have a robust manufacturing base, and how all of those economies that have a robust manufacturing base have a society that respects people who work with their hands. And I think we got ourselves seduced by the idea of technology and having an app, as if an app is going to solve it all. You still got to pour concrete. You still got to smelt steel. You still have to build affordable housing. And we have very few people who are interested in those sorts of careers because of the system that we've built for the last 30, 40 years, in my opinion.
Yeah, well said. My son-in-law actually has worked in aluminum smelting, and he's quite young. And he said, I look around the plant, and there's no one my age. I mean, they're all kind of retiring quick. There's two parts right now that we're in trouble with. Number one, we don't have enough new people going in, but also people retiring and stepping back, where we'll say, Tim, I would love to, build that staircase, but there's only 4 guys in Ontario who can do it. So you're going to have to, get in line, and we can't put in this till we do that. So then everything kind of gets pushed back, right? Like but I say too, is we've had conversations around, we've got some brilliantly foreign trained professionals coming in who are not using those skills. So we have to figure out a way, how do we verify those credentials and get those people working? Ultimately, what is going to be a success for Canada, but a success for them is newcomers as well, because they're going to have great paying jobs in a rewarding field.
Yeah, and I think the housing crisis that is now becoming the number one political issue in this country is very quickly going to shine a spotlight on the real estate and construction industry. So it's been my observation that government acts fast and quickly when there becomes an existential threat. And so this country is at this point where the affordability of housing is never going to get where they hope it's going to get. The politicians are all out there running around with their sound bites talking about housing supply. And yes, I agree that more supply should, in theory, bring the costs down. But when you have a labor shortage where half of the construction industry is expected to retire within the decade, while demand is forecasted to double over that period of time, construction costs are never going to come down. And so right now, construction costs are the thing that drives the housing costs. And I don't think that folks have really figured that out. There are some, but solving that challenge around bringing construction costs down is where I think government policy is going to go next. And frankly, that, in my opinion, that walks us into a conversation about industrialized construction.
I mean, so right now in Ontario, this is the frustrating thing that I had to wrap my head around. Housing isn't being built, or isn't being built on a grand scale, and that's, I think, to your point of construction costs, right? So yet here you have, we're pumping through, say, at Blue Door, we put 500 people into the trades, and now we say, well, we don't have work for them, but we're going to. Obviously, there's going to be a boom. Someone's going to be, but people will wait, and then we're going to, sometimes we're our own worst enemy with. And it's just waiting for those costs. Like, what's the answer? I mean, yes, we need that. I've been told for a while that part of the reason we're in this crisis is because we don't have the people to build the housing we need. You're right. Supply is not, it's a small part of the answer, but there's much more to it.
Yeah.
What gives it? Is it that government has to help regulate those costs, or how do we move forward?
Yeah, and just before I touch on that, I always want to bring this into these conversations. Every time you hear the talking heads on the news talking about immigration in the country, population increased by over 1 million people in the last year, they never finish the sentence and say, and the reason this country needs immigration is blank. And I don't think enough people really understand that. There's a great group called the Century Initiative that's out there. Senator Omavar was involved in it. And it basically is a demographic analysis that suggests that this country needs a population of 100 million people by the year 2100, or we'll go bankrupt, meaning we will not have enough young working people to pay the tax burden of an aging society. And, and that sounds like a staggering number, going to 100 million by 2100. But all that is 2% population growth every year, which is what the feds are targeting. It just gets to be bigger and bigger numbers once the base gets bigger and bigger. But the point I'm making is, if we don't grow the population of this country, we're going to be like Japan, where they have entire neighborhoods that are abandoned. And the city, to quote the prime minister, said that he said that they're teetering on the edge of societal collapse because they don't have enough tax revenue. And so anyways, we need population growth. And with that population growth comes this pressure. Just to give you a sense, in Ontario, a pretty conservative forecast of population growth is 2% a year, suggests that Ontario is going to have population growth of 3.5 million within the next 10 years. And if you just take out some standard ratios of how many hospitals per capita, how many kilometers of roads, how many rec centers, how many schools, and you just do that math on 3.5 million, this kind of, I think, focuses the issue around demand. 3.5 million with that kind of math suggests 1.5 million homes. I think everyone's heard that stat. If those 1.5 million homes are in subdivisions like Matamy's building, it's like 800 square kilometers of new subdivisions. If the 1.5 million homes are in high-rise condo towers, it's like 5,000 condo towers, and that's 500 tower cranes a year. And Toronto's got 250 in the sky, number one in North America by a huge factor. So is that going to happen? It's 1,500 schools. It's 300 rec centers. It's 150 fire stations. It's 80 hospitals the size of Oakville, Trafalgar. Think about the demand of building that sort of stuff to support a population growth of 3.5 million that we need. And so that's the challenge in how we bring costs down, is addressing that demand side of things.
Wow, so staggering figures there. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think most Canadians were, understanding we need the immigration. I think the pushback was we also need the housing and services to support schools and everything to support,
Yeah.
which we didn't, we don't have right now. But yeah, it's definitely some challenging times ahead. Let's talk about the future. What exciting things are you working on right now that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, so it's early days with the new business, but we do have a project that's likely to go early next year in Victoria. It's 600 units of mixed use housing on a First Nation, and then there's another large industrial project that we're early stages on in Saskatoon. It's 150 acres of land development, also with a First Nation. And then there's several other ones in the GTA area. One in Ottawa that's early stages, but it's just too early for me to chat about it. But I'm super excited about building the business, hiring folks, and really like getting back closer to the projects, working more closely with clients, having a lot of fun with that whole adventure so far.
Very cool. And the 50 by 50. Tell me a little bit more about that. How's that going to work?
Yeah. So the concept there is it will take us a little while to get deals spooled up where we're either the development manager or the owner's representative. But in either of those two scenarios, we have all sorts of influence. And so it'll take us probably a year, maybe a year and a half in many instances to go through the entitlement process and get ready to hire contractors and designers. But when we do that, we're going to say to those contractors and designers, all right, Enska's managing this $300-400 million project. If you want in on this project, we expect you to help us move the needle on impact in society. And so what that means is we want a commitment that you're going to help hire at-risk youth or BIPOC youth and launch them in a career in the trades on this project. And we'll work with you to demonstrate zero premium cost around that. And we'll start to target something like 10% of all the labor hours on the job would be labor hours that are with new BIPOC apprentices on the project. You can also target stuff like 10% of the total subcontracts on a project are with businesses that are owned by BIPOC entrepreneurs. And what I'm talking about is social procurement. I did a lot of work with David LePage and Biosocial Canada. David just recently passed. But the idea of implementing that on every project that we touch is at the core of the 50 by 50 initiative.
Amazing initiative. If people wanted to reach out, find out more about Enska or the work that you're doing, or they have an idea, they can bounce off you. Where do they go to find out more information?
The website's the best place, www.enska.ca, enska.ca.
Okay, perfect. Because you know what? I'm going to be one of those people. I think we're both of the business. So I think I can help with 50 by 50. And that's exciting to see people stepping up. And absolutely should be a part of when you do a project. Let's make sure you're helping those in your community while helping build housing in your community. Tim, thanks so much for your time, for all you're doing. Thanks for caring enough to always make sure social good is a part of what you're doing, no matter how busy you are. Can't wait to see what you do with this new initiative. And what you're always welcome back to talk about some of the big things that you're doing in the future.
That's great. Thanks for having me.